Lelizwe elamakhosikazi asoze saphela amandla asoze saphela amandla asoze saphela amandla The song says let me say the world is for women, and we will never give up or lose hope. We are going to fight until the women are the regents of the world.
Now you can hear the powerful message of that song. We've decided to make a short change in the program. Instead of getting the country reports now, we will start with a high-level panel discussion. And there are various speakers. We'll ask the speakers to come forward as well. But we'd like to use this opportunity to introduce Reverend Suzanne Matale. She is the General Secretary. Is coming forward. She is the General Secretary of the Council of Churches of Zambia. And she's also the past President and Chairperson of the Economic Justice Network and the Fellowship of Christian Councils in Southern Africa. She is heavily involved in the ecumenical movement in Southern Africa, in Africa, internationally, as well as on home soil in Zambia. And it's a pleasure for us to have her with us. I think she's been to almost all the mining Indabas, 3 of the mining Indabas. The last 3, she's been here, and we always welcome her presence, and we'd like to take this opportunity to welcome her to share and chair the panel discussion for us.
Good morning, brothers and sisters, or ladies and gentlemen. You can make your choice how you want to be addressed. It's a pleasure for me to be here. If you will help me, I want to beg your indulgence that because it's a panel discussion, I'm going to be seated so that I can interrogate, investigate our very high panel this morning. Before I invite them to the table, I just want to say how wonderful it's been this morning. We had from the bishop from Tanzania in his open devotions, that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, and is looking for stewards. I think that's a very powerful way to begin a conversation on our continent. And of course, Malcolm has said clearly the objectives of this mining or alternative mining in Indaba. We have a theme that we are looking at during the entire session of our alternate mining in Indaba. Our resources. I want us to believe in that as we talk about this theme. It's our resources, our future for our children and grandchildren, putting local people first. I was a bit exaggerating. Now, let me read it as it is. Our resources, our future, putting local people first. And so this high-level panel is going to help us to deepen this discussion, to deepen our understanding of what this means. They will help us to unpack these themes so that when we continue with our discussions, we'll have a full information from the high-level panel. And now it's my very, very big honor and pleasure to invite the panel to come through and sit with me, take their seats either on my left or on my right. I think it's free sitting. And before I call them, the structure is that we are going to hear from them for a couple of minutes about their understanding of the theme. It's going to be a very highly interactive session. There will be at some point where it will be open for you to give your input, to ask your question. But what I ask is that we be very, very brief, because 1 hour, 15 minutes now is not long enough to listen to everybody. But if you could limit, we could speak to more people in this room. It's very, very important. Let me invite, with joy and pleasure, to the podium, the Honorable Member of Parliament from Zambia, Honorable Hamudulu. He's also the Chair of Public Accounts Committee in Parliament in Zambia. Honorable, you're most welcome. Please come and take your seat. Let's give him a very big hand. And then I want to invite Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze. Please come back. We really need to hear more from you. He was already introduced as Director of Zimbabwe Labor and Social Development Research Institute. Welcome, Dr. Kanyenze, again. Let's give him a big hand. Mr. Matthews Kiavane from Mpumalanga Province's Southern Africa's Green Revolutionary Council. Please come forth wherever you are. Are you here? Yes, there he comes. Mr. Carlos Bittencourt. If you're here, I hope I pronounced your name properly. Bittencourt. Sorry? Bittencourt. Bittencourt. Okay, fine. Welcome. Please, let's give him a very big hand. And I believe that he will be needing some interpretation. Perhaps you should pull your chair forward so you could sit right next to him in the absence of the usual interpretation facility. Last but not least, and I don't mean to demean the women, I should have actually called her first. Ms. Amina Miruko from the Muslim Council of Tanzania, please come forth. And I invite you to sit right next to me over here. We are delighted to have you. And so, panel, I want you, in a minute each, to try and unpack for us what this means to you, the theme, our resources, our future, putting local people first. In your work, in your responsibility as leaders of your communities, how does this speak to each one of you? I want to know. Honorable Amadulu, I want to begin with you. Since you are a politician, because you are the people who have given us a lot of trouble in this continent. So now speak for yourself, Honorable Member of Parliament.
Thank you. You are very right. The biggest problem is a politician. And I'm one of them. And I have been in Parliament for 8 years now, and chairing the committee on estimates. This is the budget committee. And I have been involved in this issue for 5 years as the chair of this committee. Our resources, our future, putting local people first. Simply, the local people, the owners, must benefit from the resources that God gave them. I think for me, that's how I can summarize this theme. To go into the details, really the substance of my submission, and I will summarize. Mining benefits, basics. I think we must all understand. As we advocate, as we demand, we must be very clear about the issues and what we want, with very strong evidence. Now, mining can benefit a country in many ways. Employment, local infrastructure, foreign exchange earnings, the forward and backward linkages explained by Dr. Kanyenze, tax revenues. But I want to tell you that in the short term, for Africa, the biggest thrust should be on maximizing tax revenues. The argument that the mining operations will create jobs is not very correct, because mining is highly mechanized. So to say that mining companies must be given concessions because they create jobs is a bit misplaced. The jobs lie in the greater economy. So what we can get, what is feasible for us now is to get enough money, enough revenues to finance the broad-based economic and development agenda, so that we can invest where our people are. The foreign exchange earnings, the same foreign exchange earned by mines is consumed by the same mines. It's more or less not available for the greater economy. Forward and backward linkages, you know very well now with the new trade agenda, the issue of tariffs that we are fighting, that it's very difficult for Africa at the moment to compete in supplying the inputs to the mines. Talking about my country, most of the inputs in the mines are imported, and therefore we are not benefiting from here. There is little value addition in our countries. So in the short term, our best recourse is to get as much money as possible from our mines. Then the second issue, we have now agreed really, and evidence shows that we are getting little revenue from our mines. Talking about my country, the admission of the Minister of Finance, that in 2013, the huge mining operations in our country contribute as low as 5% to the total government revenue. 5%. In 1970, the contribution of the mining to the mining companies to the government revenue was about 58%. Just a few years of our post-independence era. Now, let us be very clear. The arguments, talking to many mining companies appearing before our committee, I think we are seeing things differently. The mining companies have been pushing for a profit-based tax system. Now, we know very well that now with transfer pricing and hedging, that is becoming even more sophisticated. And using that type of tax regime, we are not getting the best, and there is evidence. Now, what we need to be very sure as we advocate is whether we go for the profit-based tax system or revenue-based, the one that is simpler. Quantity times price. That one, even in an ordinary country, even with little capacity, that we can do. Now, there is a serious opposition. The mining companies want a profit-based tax system. For us, what is feasible and doable in Africa at the moment is the revenue or turnover-based tax. so that we are very clear. 1 minute. They are talking about capacity. And I think there's a story, maybe sponsored by the mining companies. Our governments are saying we are developing capacity. And this issue of capacity building is never ending. In the meantime, our minerals are going in their raw format. And before we realize, some of the mines are almost closing, and you are waiting for capacity building to manage to tax using the profit-based tax system. And when we want to come close to the other tax system that is feasible, there is strong opposition. But let me conclude, just fast forward. The biggest problem is not necessarily the mining companies. The biggest problem is our governments. The governments are elected at the behest of the best interest of the people. And the mining companies must operate on our terms. Like the doctor said, if we cannot put the terms, let the minerals wait underground. Our biggest problem is not the mining companies per se. It's our governments that have sold out, by and large. And later on, I will amplify that point.
Thank you so much, Honorable. We really appreciate for your exposition. I said earlier on that politicians are a problem, but I've also discovered that even moderators can be problems. Because I neglected to invite to the podium, to the panel, our esteemed Dr. Kojo Busia from United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. How can I ever apologize to you, sir? I am so sorry, I apologize, yes. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I am sorry, and I take full responsibility for that. And to atone my sins, I know you haven't even caught your breath. I'm immediately going to ask you to speak. And we are speaking on the theme, Dr. Kojo, if you don't mind calling you Dr. Kojo, on the theme of our conference, which is our resources, our future, putting local people first. And because we want this to be highly interactive, I'm going to ask you to speak for 3 to 4 minutes at the most on what you have for us this morning, Dr. Kojo.
I would like to address the theme of this conference by saying we need to think globally in all things public, but we can only act locally as agents of communities and stakeholders. Now I'd like to share with you very briefly some of the thinking about mining and development in Africa currently, which is being led by the African Union, and of course the United Nations being a partner to the African Union. We have been charged to support this initiative called the African Mining Vision, which was launched in Addis Ababa in 2009. As you know, it takes a long process to get the whole continent to agree on certain things. So it took some time to come to that point. But briefly to talk about it, the context, the strategic context of developing, or the need for African mining vision, and also talk a little bit about its principles, and then perhaps if there's time, discuss the implementation of that initiative. Yesterday there was a session of African Ministers of Mining and Industry, which was chaired by Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, who is the AU chairperson. And she called for, in her opening remarks, what she called the African Mining Vision Compact with private businesses, which is an interesting development by itself. For the first time, the African Union saying we need to have a compact with private sector in terms of how we do business in Africa in mining. Last year, the same meeting at Indaba, there was a call for a model that delivers long-term broader benefits for all African citizens. The term being used was decent mining, and a transition from extractive industry to development industry. another change in thinking about how we do mining in Africa. Just last October, the African Union convened a meeting of African ministers of finance, and that meeting called for commodity-based industrialization in Africa rather than exporting raw materials from Africa. We need value addition on this continent that will create jobs for our citizens and our people. What I'm suggesting is that there is a radical change in paradigm, in thinking about how Africa utilizes its mineral resources for its benefit of its people. And in the context of this meeting, I can see that expectations are high when I read the concept paper for this meeting. The benefits of mining on this continent are not being equally felt by all citizens or actors on this continent. As you rightly put it in your concept paper, we externalizing the benefits of mining on this continent, whereas we are internalizing the cost of mining on this continent. Therefore, the failure to manage the divergence in expectations from mining can lead to conflict and tension between and among stakeholders. It is therefore critically important that we redefine the terms of engagement between the state and society in the exploitation of African minerals. So then the question is, what is the African mining vision? What does it say, and how does it affect constituencies such as yours that is seeking a radical change in the way mining is done on this continent? The African mining vision is a goal, it's a strategic goal that is an aspiration that the governments and people of Africa aspire to change the rules of engagement. It calls for a transparent, equitable, and optimal exploitation of mineral resources to underpin broad-based, sustainable growth for socio-economic development. It is not about mining, it is about development. It essentially seeks to use Africa's natural resources to transform the continent's social and economic development path. As I said, it was adopted in 2009 and has become the framework for developing mineral resources in Africa. It is being used by African countries to reform their mineral policies, legal and regulatory frameworks, and also by our regional economic communities like SADC, ECOWAS, IGAD, East African Community, and so on. It is recognized internationally today as the primary framework for engaging in mineral exploitation in Africa. There is no other policy framework that has such continental profile and international recognition. Of course, it is taking longer than expected to implement it, but it is being implemented with the establishment of the African Mineral Development Center, which was recently launched in Maputo, Mozambique, in December of 2013 by the Conference of Ministers of Mining of Africa. So, what are the tenets? What are the principles? The AMV seeks to transform finite natural resource capital and transient wealth into a lasting forms of capital beyond mining itself. It defines benefits in a much broader sense than just material benefits of mining to people. Indeed, the value of mining goes beyond just taxes and revenues by governments and so on. As a sector, it is anchored in development of a competitive infrastructure through regional and economic linkages that indeed no one African country can optimally exploit its natural resources without regional cooperation. It seeks to optimize Africa's labor and knowledge, Africa's human resources rather than external capital and external knowledge. It also seeks to harness the potential of small-scale mining, which is a huge sector on this continent, to improve rural livelihoods and integrate the rural economy into the national economy. So, some of the success factors that will propel this agenda. What are the success factors? We need to have a belief in the power of indigenous ideas, that indeed Africans can think for themselves and optimally exploit their resources on their own. We have to have a shared vision based on a long-term strategy of exploiting our mineral resources. There's a need for leadership and political will at all levels, both the continent, the state, communities, and citizens as well. Implementation can be fastened depending on internal and external factors, but the context is favorable to Africa. And we need to mainstream the African mining vision at the national level through what we call the country mining visions. I think my time is up, so I will pause here and we can engage during the discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Poto. I'm so delighted that you came. Thank you. Without much ado, I'm going to ask my sister on the right from the Muslim Council Tanzania to go for it. Your turn.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Okay, as I have been introduced, my name is Amina Udi Miruko from Tanzania, from the organization known as Muslim Council of Tanzania. In short, we are going to discuss on our resource, our future, putting local people first. As we know, mining activities and gas exploration has advantages and disadvantages. By looking the real situation in Tanzania, economically and socially, there are some of the problems which has been caused by mining activities and exploration of gas. There is emerging of conflicts between the government and the people, local people, who are along the mining activities and gas exploration, which has been caused death. People are dying, women are getting miscarriage, children are not going to school, and such things. Not only that, there is eruption of diseases, which is caused by the pollution, which is coming from the mining industries. For example, there is a place which is known as North Mara. Here in North Mara, there is a mining industry known as Barrick. There was a problem whereby there is drainage system which was polluting streams, and those streams were used by people for their animals and themselves. So this situation caused death to the animals, and the people had skin diseases. Not only that, people had no trust to the government, simply because the government is only supporting and taking good care of the investors, and the local people are being kept forward. So people have no trust with the government, which arise conflict among the people and the government. There is another problem whereby youth are used to steal mining to the mining industries, but the government has taken no any measure for these youth who are stealing some of the gold. So the government has to make sure that there are measures which has to be taken for these people. They are employed to make sure that they are not stealing some of the gold to these mining industries. Also, the issue of fishing activities. Most of the areas, especially the coast areas, were depending on the fishing activities. But exploration of gas, for example, in Mtwara and Lindi, in the area known as Songosongo in Kilwa, most of the people were depending on fishing activities, especially women. So now they are not getting any income from the exploration process, which is using some of the chemicals to explore gas. So there is this problem. Also, the employers who are employed in these mining activities and gas exploration are coming from abroad. The youth and the people who are, the local people are not given priority to be employed. Also, small-scale farming and small miners has been affected due to mining activities. Women has been highly affected due to all these things, as we know that when there is a problem somewhere, women are highly affected. Not only that, there is also child labor. Most of the children are not going to school. They are engaging in mining activities. And this is a big problem which has to be solved. But the CBOs and FBOs, we have done a lot of things to make sure things are being clear. We are doing advocacy, and the government is aware on this, and they are aware on some of the things which are happening there, and they are trying to solve them. For example, as I have told you that in North Mara there was a problem of barrick in drainage system. Now they are building water cleaner to make sure that there is no water pollution, and not only that, they are using that. They are cleaning that water to make sure that it could be used by people. It is safe. Also, religious leaders have gone to see the restoration, and soon the problem of drainage system and water pollution in North Mara will be solved. And this is because of the advocacy which has been done by the FBOs. And we are among of them. We have gone there and see what is being done. Also, there is people's compensation. Some of the people has been affected by this by mining activities and gas exploration. We just sat with the government and tell them that these people has to be compensated, and the compensation has been done. Also, the government has seen the importance of the FBOs in advocating on the issues. So there is cooperation between the FBOs and the government in solving the issues and in solving the conflicts which are emerging.
Thank you so much, Sister Amina. Those are stories from the real people, stories on the ground from those who are in the trenches. Now, may I turn my attention to my brother here, Brother Kiabane, again from the community. Over to you.
Amanda. Thank you and good morning. Our resources, our future, putting local people first. Then I think we should know that issues such as water quality, soil quality, air quality should also come first. I'm more worried about us being here, tailing behind mining companies, coming down to Cape Town to have our alternative mining in Indaba. leaving the communities who are actually victims of mining very far away and locating ourselves in a very expensive hotel. I'm registering a concern because the victims are up in arms fighting against mining companies, and they need our support, our solidarity. By visiting them, that will have actually made a different case completely. The concern that the issue that I want to put forward is mining for many years has uprooted communities, created dependency and desperation. And it will be a serious crime against the very same communities that are victimized by mining companies that we some kind of subscribe to the idea that mining will better the lives of our people. I indicated that water should actually be considered as the first priority because it is life. Where there's a mining activity throughout, the quality of the water drops. In some cases, it turns into acid. The whole river, to an extent that the local people cannot afford to buy purified water. Only the owners of the mining companies, government officials or employees, or those who are able to at least earn something, are able to buy, purified water. So we better be careful when we kind of seek to follow along the line the belief that mining will better the lives of our communities or our people. More so, the issue of the soil quality also comes into the picture. If your water is contaminated with acid mine drainage, therefore the soil will be contaminated, making it very difficult for community members to produce food from the very same land that they have. The small piece of land, they cannot produce food. So, turning them into victims of dependency and desperation. Before coming here, I visited a community in Emelo where a mining company, unfortunately owned by South Africans, mined. When I refer to South Africans, it's not, I want to say, it was a BEE, Black Economic Empowerment Company. It mined, it never rehabilitated, and it left. Now community members, because they've been pushed into desperation, are entering the underground workings to collect coal. So when I left Mpumalanga, when I left Emelo coming to Johannesburg, on Saturday, going to Johannesburg, I received a call to say 2 of the local youth, both of them, the other one's 19 years old, the other one is 20 years old. The other one died because the whole thing collapsed on them, the other one was hospitalized. So now it also comes to the whole issue of the safety of our communities. Someone wants to do mining because some kind of mentality has been created to say we cannot survive without the activity mining. And yet they leave, when they leave a problem to a community that is so disparate. So I'm raising that as a challenge for further discussion. I've prepared some slides for discussions, but later on. When it comes to air quality, I think in most communities where there's a mining activity, you cannot go around without a complaint of people suffering from sinuses. Who's taking care or the responsibility for those costs? If someone is suffering lung symptoms, if someone is suffering from headache, they have to pay with their own money for medical attention. Not mining companies. Sometimes the government doesn't actually do the proper follow the proper processes. I also want to touch on the role of mining companies in destroying communities. I think it has been responsible for all the previous wars and conflicts, and it is still, up until today, responsible for all the social conflicts within our communities. The fact that people are migrating from other parts of, other regions of Africa into South Africa is because of this so-called dependency on mining, the so-called opportunities that are presented. But also, we are facing a serious challenge because the dropping or the declining water quality situation and the soil quality will force people to migrate to the north of Africa, which is going to further create future wars because people will be looking for clean water sources for land from where they can produce food and so forth. So it is responsible for all the conflicts that you ever know of.
I will jump Dr. Kanyese here because for the moment I want him to prepare real confessions. And because we heard from him this morning, I will give him his own opportunity to confess in reality, and I'm going to give him a document to sign, which I can take home. In the meantime, I'd like to invite my brother Carlos from Brazil. It's your time now. You have 4 minutes to do your presentation, and then we will move on from there. Please get ready for your intervention in a little while. Thank you.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Carlos Bittencourt, sou do IBASE do Rio de Janeiro, Brasil.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Carlos Bittencourt. I'm from IBASE from Rio in Brazil.
Os problemas que aparecem em África são muito parecidos com os problemas que a gente também vive no Brasil e na América Latina.
The problems that Africa is facing are very similar to the problems that we face in Brazil and Latin America.
São séculos de uma promessa em que a mineração, a extração de petróleo podem trazer desenvolvimento para todo um país, mas significam uma acumulação na mão de poucos.
Centuries that mining has been promising development and wealth into a country, but all that wealth and development is only centralized into very few people.
Sobre os impactos comunitários, no Brasil criamos um Comitê Nacional em Defesa dos Territórios frente à mineração.
In regards to the community impact, we've created a committee that deals with the impact of the mining sector.
Com muitas comunidades que vivem processos muito parecidos com o que foram expostos aqui.
And it deals with the communities that suffer these impacts. The impacts are very similar to the ones that have been mentioned here.
Impactos sobre a água, sobre a poluição do ar, sobre as mulheres, sobre violações de direitos humanos e uma série desses tipos de impactos.
Impacts over the air with pollution, with water, impacts with women and human rights and all the issues that have been raised here.
E nossa tentativa maior é fazer com que as resistências deixem de ser resistências locais e muito frágeis diante do poder das empresas e dos governos nacionais.
So our goal is to make the resistances so that they won't be only regional resistances or just small resistances against governments and powers.
E construir uma sinergia e uma compreensão de um problema que é comum, nacional e regional.
But to build a synergy into a problem that is common within the country in a national level and global level.
Porque também há problemas sobre a economia nacional muito importantes que devem ser salientados.
Because there are many important issues on top of the national economy that they need to be addressed as well.
Os minérios são recursos finitos e não renováveis.
Minerals are finite, they are non-renewable resources.
Portanto, se multiplica por 2 ou por 3 a extração mineral, se reduz pela metade ou pela terça parte do tempo de vida das jazidas minerais.
So if you extract the double or triple amount, you're cutting short the life of that font.
Então, o problema para a economia nacional, em termos de uma estratégia nacional de desenvolvimento, também é a perda de soberania frente à extração mineral e à evasão de riquezas.
So we need a national strategic plan for mining and the extraction of wealth and all the different areas in regards to that.
subordinação à flutuação internacional de preços,
the price fluctuation internationally,
pressão sobre as fontes de água,
pressure over water, drinkable water,
pressão sobre as reservas nacionais de minérios e petróleo,
pressure over the national reserves of minerals and oil,
uma forte valorização da moeda nacional, ocasionando um processo de importações muito forte, enfraquecendo a industrialização,
overvaluing the national currency so that there is a over importation and then you have a decrease on the local produce.
Fazendo pressão sobre os preços dos alimentos, por exemplo.
And that brings the prices of food, for instance, up.
Então, acreditamos que é necessário juntar as resistências locais a uma compreensão nacional de que a mineração, se não controlada,
So we need to join the national resistances and create this national movement so that we can bring about the awareness that if the mining is not controlled,
e controlada significa reduzir sua escala e mudar a sua qualidade.
and by control I mean we need to reduce the scale and change its quality.
Seguirá causando danos irreversíveis às pessoas, que são o mais importante.
If that doesn't change, it will carry on affecting people and damaging people.
Aos laços comunitários, que são tão fundamentais quanto as pessoas.
Different communities which are just as important as singular people.
E ao conjunto dos países e da região.
And the countries within that region.
Então, creio que esse momento é muito importante para construirmos essa compreensão comum.
So I believe this is a moment very important to build this understanding together.
E a tentativa de construir uma agenda comum desde de baixo.
And the willingness to build this common agenda from the bottom level.
É isso. Graças. Obrigado.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlos. Now, as I promised, I'm going to ask for some interventions. But please promise me that you will not make any speeches because speeches have already been made.
We are living in a huge global economy where we have companies and capital concentrated in a way that never in human history have we ever seen. So that whatever we're talking about in Africa, we need to be aware, obviously, of the power dynamics, that we're part of a much bigger global game, with corporate capital larger than we've ever seen. And also to remember that in the last decade, mining has grown exponentially, particularly with the economic collapse in 2008. We now see mining on a scale and a level of destruction we have never ever witnessed in history. When we mine, it's total destruction. We create toxic wastelands. Are we putting the fossil fuels that are destroying climate and our machinery for minerals and metals before water and life?
If you are saying that communities are not benefiting from mining, what then do the communities consider to be the alternative? I would very much like us to explore this in this gathering this time, because I think it's critically important for us all to start to look at the alternatives to mining.
A lot of what we're saying is accepting this extractivist model as given, that we are going to continue to extract at scale, and what we need to be looking at is the greater redistribution of those benefits. Carlos touches on how do we go beyond that? What's our vision beyond that? He's talking about mining at a different scale. He's talking about changing the conditions of mining. And I think as we talk about alternatives, let us also think outside of the box and challenge whether this extractivist model can ever be transformed, or we continue to see devastating social and environmental impacts for communities, not just in the immediate vicinities of mines.
The question I have is to both the opening doctors, Kojo and our brother Godfrey. I mean, even if Godfrey gave a kind of more critical approach, he seemed to have hope in this African mining vision. And I'm not so sure whether I've read the 51 pages that you've got in this vision. There's nothing about the impacts that everyone speaks about in there. There's nothing about redress for the past damage and continuing damage that you have. You know, and it's presented as this, and I'm not so sure whether the African mining vision is actually what we want. So I think you guys have to make another strong example why we should do it, because I've seen what your motivation is. You also use examples about South Africa's mining charter, things that we don't even look at anymore because it's a bit of a fraud. Why you guys put it there for the rest of Africa as a solution, I don't know. Please tell us.
I have a question about political will. As the mining vision represents strategic aspirations, when it comes choice to strategic aspirations or putting money in individuals' pockets, most political individuals take the money in their pocket rather than the aspiration. So they may speak good words, but do the actions even mirror those words? So I would ask a question around what is the assessment of political will? And I would congratulate to some extent the government in Zambia for taking specific actions around protecting job loss, around refusing to export dirt, unprocessed copper, to India and China, as specific actions that at least move in a positive direction, even if they're small steps.
My name is Said Jambo. I'm coming from Malawi, a small country in SADC, which has just started mining. As I'm working, we are working from an interfaith perspective on issues of mining. It's just, we have just started. But what we have observed is that whether it is true about other countries which started mining a long time ago, but as an interfaith, what we have observed is that there is a serious problem. When you look at the mining cycle, you have the exploration, the commissioning stage, and the mining operations, and then the decommissioning stage. We have observed that in all those stages, our governments or our states are not following. And when I heard from Brother Kojo, the director of UNCA Africa, he have only expressed about policies which our countries are going to follow. But when you go to the communities, they are not following those the mining cycle in totality, because they are leaving out one important aspect, the involvement of the local government councils and the following or the follow-up on the environmental impact assessment, which is impacting heavily on our communities.
We in the world, we need minerals, natural resources for livelihood of the humanity in all countries. Some countries don't have some minerals or oil we have in different countries. What I think is needed is to be truthful in doing the business of mining. We cannot resist mining nor extractions. The multinationals have overtaken the governments. The governments must be smart to think for the people and for humanity in general. If you go in few countries which presented, you go like Brazil, okay, you see the situation, but who is mining? You find some people from Brazil. You come to Tanzania, who is mining? Are foreigners. And our governments corrupt. At the end, nothing remains. At least in Brazil, in the future, you will have some Brazilians with some money to carry economic development to some extent. In Africa, our honorable MP of Zambia, you are representing your fellow African ministers. You are the ones who are killing Africans. We need new governments who think for owning the profit made out of mining. Currently, African countries remains with just expenditure. So the problem is our governments and the people from the World Bank. Stop commanding Africa. Allow Africa to be free. We need new liberation movements of Africa. Thank you.
I want to go home in peace and not to end up in prison. All right. And the last one is...
If you could touch the issue of how the community can take back their rights, can take their right back of their land. I come from Allen Ridge. The mine is right in the center of our town, but I'll tell you it's about 2% of people living in Allen Ridge that works in that mine. So I would like if you could touch that subject. And The other thing that I will basically end up with is, and please, can you please let this mining in Indaba not be just in vanity? We must see action. We are tired of talking and talking and talking. Please let us act.
If you were given just 1 second to say what you need to say about this, that's what I want to hear from you. One punchline in addition to the responses, 1 minute each.
Your question about AMV, is this the right model for Africa's problems in the mining sector? Well, I mean, the African mining vision emerged out of a systematic examination of the regime of mining on the continent over the last 100 years or more. If you take this sub-region, Southern Africa, you're talking about almost 200 years of mining. So there's a much longer history here, and the mining sector is more institutionalized. For the rest of the continent, probably over the last 100 years or even less. But there are two separate regimes, if you look at it. In the sub-region, you have settler colonialism, whereby the mining were owned essentially by certain populations, but on the same sort of country, in the same countries. So the regime is slightly different, and the way mining operates in Southern Africa is slightly different, even though as you go up north in the continent, you also see patterns of similarities. The point is, there was a need for a change, that the externally driven capital, somebody mentioned multinational corporations, that simply wants Africa to export raw materials without any value addition, which has become the core of the problem, because you're not creating jobs, you're not adding value, you're not utilizing local expertise, and then yet you leave all the costs in terms of environmental hazard and all those things.
I think one person summarized what we are here for. I think this is another phase of the struggle. The colonizers knew that colonialism was wrong, but because it benefited them, they kept it. In Africa here, the one-party state dictatorship, we knew, even those who were at the helm, that those were wrong systems, but they sustained them because they benefited. Even today, the type of tax regime, the mining regimes, are there that don't benefit the people. Not because the people in government don't know. They know. They even have better experts advice. They have experts, but the political will is lacking because they are benefiting. Simply corruption. The mining companies must mine at our behest. Simple. Even the environmental issues that you are raising, the mining companies are allowed to mine against the environmental regulations. So the buck stops at the government.
These investors make sure that people, local people, are involved in working equally. What I just think is, when these investors are coming in our countries, what we should do, leaders in the government, have to make sure that the agreements, on the agreements that they agree that when you are going to invest here, you have to make sure that maybe 40% of the people who will be employed in your company should be the people from our community. I think that there should be agreements on such kind. Also, the way forward should be clear listed that what we have just talked here should not end here. Action should be done. We are tired of just talking. It is the time for action.
Who actually decides that there has to be mining next to a community? Is it the community that decides because of its own needs? Or is somebody who comes from somewhere where the community does not know, who tells them there's a mineral here, we want to mine it and we're going to provide jobs and an economic well-being? It is not the community, it is the multinational companies that are deciding, or somebody who wants to make profit out of the mineral, who decides, and when the community refuses, there's tension. there's the use of the police in most cases and the army. I want to be specific in supporting one community called the Squattana community. They never invited the mining company. They had the land. They were producing food from there, doing cattle grazing without any conflicts, and they had clean water. The atmosphere was, the air was healthy, the air quality was very good. And the mining company came in, it took the land, it promised them jobs, it never employed them, it contaminated the water. And when they started blasting, they told community members that, see, your properties are of poor quality in that when we do our blasting, you must all run out of your houses and stand over that road. So the question is, when are communities allowed to make decisions? Because that community has been living for years, it survived many years. They never had all the luxuries of cars, which they never needed anyway, expensive Mercedes-Benzes and so forth. But somebody decides that there has to be some economic upliftment of that community. It's a challenge.
I sit on a board of the Central Bank in Zimbabwe. We had a mining claim close to the border with South Africa. And we were told the new act says we must divest from our non-core business, so the mine had to be sold. So we said an emirate wanted to buy that mining claim for 50 million. And as we were concluding the deal, someone just raised their voice and said, but why are we selling something that we don't know? And then we were all like, okay, yeah, that sounds, we're almost about to sign the deal. And then we said, we didn't know what was on the ground, what we were selling. So eventually we asked for geological service to be undertaken. And we were so embarrassed and shocked. On that we were going to sell, it was a coal mine, Tuli coal. And then we didn't realize that there was not only coal, there was also diamonds, there was also methane gas on that 32,000 hectares. And it was worth, we could not even quantify the value. Eventually we were told, you better not sell it. You better run it yourselves. So one of the major challenges with what we are discussing, our resources. The Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. We don't even know the resources that we are saying our resources. It's usually the foreign miner who knows and is negotiating with the government which does not know what is underground. So that's the first problem. And the laws that we have, the framework that Dr. Kochko was referring to, which is extractive, and most of our laws are colonial, it gives the first right to the claimant, isn't it? That's why if someone discovers a mineral under my hut, that person already automatically has got the right, isn't it? And I have to move, I have to be moved. And that's the problem, that's why it's happening in Botswana, it's happening all over the place, isn't it? Because the framework is such that the one who has got the claim is the one that has got the right. It's not developmental. So we need to start off by knowing, because technology allows us now to know exactly what is on the ground, what we are sitting on. We've had examples in Zimbabwe where a mining house would pretend to government that they are exploring for 10 years. They are testing the sand, exporting the sand, and yet they were exporting minerals. It's only imagine late that government was losing a lot, and the mining house was saying they were still exploring. So we need to understand, to explore, to quantify. Now the technologies allow us to do that, so that we've got full ownership. One good thing that Botswana did,
thank you, Doctor.
They had a pull-up fund where government said this is our resource, we must own it. 50% of it is ours. So I think that's what we need to do to control what we own, like what the Arabs have done with their own.
This is a very disobedient panelist.
Thank you.
But thank you anyway. Yes.
Very quickly, please. I am in
Vou me concentrar em duas questões que são parecidas.
I will focus on two questions that are very similar.
Sobre as alternativas, tanto em nível local como em nível nacional.
About the alternatives in a local and regional level.
Em nível local, estou de acordo que muitas vezes a melhor alternativa é não levar a mineração. Muitas comunidades vivem bem sem a mineração.
In a local level, I agree that maybe many communities are better off without mining, so that shouldn't be an option.
E quando o estrago já foi feito, é necessário construir alternativas, diversificação econômica, mecanismos de volta aos modos, ou avanço aos modos de acumulação de riquezas e distribuição das riquezas.
And once the damage is done, you need to create alternatives to gather wealth and create development so that you can deal with the damage.
Em nível nacional, é necessário construir um processo nacional de transição para outro modelo.
In a national level, we need to create a national project of transition to the new model.
Que deve começar imediatamente através de medidas de emergência.
That should start immediately through measures.
Que partem da diminuição da escala e da mudança da qualidade da mineração.
And they will come from a place that will diminish the scale and will change the rate of producing of mining.
E se relacionam com medidas não diretamente ligadas à mineração, mas que têm um impacto importante sobre ela.
And they connect to measures that are not directly connected to mining, but there are measures that need to be put in place so that mining can happen.
Como processos de reforma agrária e nacionalização das minas.
Like agricultural processes and nationalizations of mines.
Em reforma agrária.
In agricultural reformation.
E temos que saber que isso não vai ser dado de graça, isso tem que ser tomado com as nossas próprias mãos.
And we know this is not going to be given freely. We need to take hold of it and make it happen.
What remains for me really is to ask you to help me to put your hands together to thank this panel. They've done justice to our issue. Thank you for your attention. I've had a wonderful time to summarize what has been said because they've said some real punchy, great things in their own way. But because of time, thank you so much for being here and thank you for listening. And thank you from me personally, the panelists. You've been wonderful. May the good Lord bless you. Amen.